Good evening, viewers, and welcome back to Candid Talk. Our guest today is Paul Abraham. Up until recently, he was the Chief Operating Officer of IndusInd Bank, but he continues to serve as an advisor at the moment. And he uses this extra time, if you will, to devote his energies into a large number of interests across domains. He's the president of the Hinduja Foundation. He's the founder at the Sarmaya Arts Foundation. He's on the advisory council for the Sanctuary Nature Foundation. And last but not the least, and this is going to be music to many startup founders, co-founders, and entrepreneurs, he has entered the ecosystem as a startup investor and mentor. Paul, a very warm welcome to the show.
Many thanks, Avik. Happy to be here.
So, Paul, I guess these days, right, for the right or wrong reasons, banking and financial services is very much in the spotlight, and it has been ever since maybe 2008 for some wrong reasons. But around the time that you were beginning your career, what was banking back in the day, and what prompted your decision to become a banker?
Well, I think the banking scenario in those days, and I'm talking about 1982 when I started my career, it was a more predictable world. And the fundamental thing was that most of what you had to offer on the retail side was very much in terms of what we do today, minus some of the fancies. But on the corporate side, I think largely it was limited to working capital finance and a few, not so complex products like, trade support and facilitation, letters of credit, guarantees, and things like that. Mm-hmm. And then from those rather simple days, slowly it started to evolve in terms of the complexity, in terms of the breadth and scope, and also in terms of the sheer spread. When I started, I would say that the key was a certain element of predictability. You had typically a turn of the cycle maybe once every 5 years when we went through that pre-March period of tight money markets and things like that. Mm-hmm. I think one of the big changes that have happened now is that unpredictability is pretty much the norm. Many item of flux has hit the industry, not just in India, worldwide. And I think the challenges are on how to stay engaged, understand the complexities and cope with some of these and create the strategies that you need to stay afloat.
Mm-hmm. Also talk to us about the culture of banking back in those days, because if you're looking at the early 80s, right, or well into the 90s, being part of an MNC meant that one would presumably have the opportunity to go and stay and live and work abroad, much like what happened with IT in through the 90s, etc. Because I've seen one of your talks where you've said that this was also one of the motivations.
So, the thing is that, Avik, to be very candid, I started my career with a bank which was a British bank, of course, had its origins in Calcutta, Grindlays. And Grindlays at that time was the largest foreign bank in the country with 56 branches. And you could actually, have a career in the bank from when you join till when you retire. Mm-hmm. Subsequent to that, I joined a Dutch bank called ABN AMRO. And I must say that, unlike Grindlays, ABN AMRO was a relatively smaller presence in the country, but a humongous presence across the world because they were in almost 70 countries. Right. And travel was the norm then. I mean, I could have, if just give you an example, visits to head office across my career to the city of Amsterdam, I must have done more than 70 trips. So, that's one city and many such.
Right.
So, Greenlace was a little more muted because the India footprint was much bigger. In fact, Calcutta was our biggest branch network for a city, but it was present in all over the country, starting from places like Tuticorin all the way to Shimla and Srinagar and Darjeeling. So, yeah, you could be a rookie and you could be a senior guy and you had a place in the country somewhere. But with the story was slightly different. Yeah, you were much more international.
So did it ever get to the point, particularly at ABN, where your initial sort of wanderlust, you know, for traveling became an overkill, and you said, "Yeah, okay, no more traveling." Did it get to that point, or
Yeah, not really. I think one of the beauties of Ibn Amro was that you traveled quite extensively, but
Mhm.
you also traveled for very valid reasons, right? So you had a lot of work, you had a lot of opportunity to meet international colleagues, you had an opportunity to see international markets. To give you an example, when I moved to Singapore with Ibn Amro, I was in a job that actually covered everything from Pakistan through to Australia, Japan, and Korea. And it was incredible the level of simplicity at the one end and the advanced complexity at the other.
Mhm.
So from visiting fascinating countries, you also got to see very rudimentary markets and very evolved markets. So it was an absolute delight and a big learning. So not really. So I really enjoyed all my travel. Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's talk about more recent times and how the banking sector itself is being perceived. If we go back to maybe almost a decade back, right, as the economy worldwide as well as in India was resurfacing after the 2008 financial crisis, there was a lot of buoyancy in terms of expectations. There was good, solid economic growth on the ground. The fundamentals were very strong, and in fact, I remember a report. This was a joint, like a prognosis, if you will, that was submitted by the Boston Consulting Group. So FICCI was part of it, and IBA, Indian Banks Association, was part of it, which said India Banking 2020. And the tagline was making a decade's promise come true, something like that, right? So tremendous amount of buoyancy. And now that we are actually in 2020, right? Obviously because of the pandemic, over and everything else, back in April, around unlock 1.0, correct me if I'm wrong, Moody's came in and said, okay, whatever positive or mildly positive outlook, because of the disruption, because of the quality of the assets, because of everything else from a liquidity standpoint, it had changed the outlook to negative, right? And more recently, I think a couple of months back, CRISIL, amongst other agencies, came up with a report where they're saying the entire credit growth is actually show a decline in this fiscal by 2 to 3%. So all in all, right? Plus the banking, the EMI moratorium, once that opens up, what's going to happen, etc., etc. So if I, sort of summarize this, right now the augury seems to be very bleak as far as the banking sector is concerned, particularly if one reads media reports or reports from that of the analysts. How far do you concur with this view?
See, my take on this, there is the big picture take and then there is the moment in time take, right? I think big picture take for the foreseeable future has to be optimistic and positive because this is a vast country, it's significantly underbanked, and the opportunities are plenty to make a difference through banking and quasi-banking, a presence on the ground. So I don't think we are anywhere near saturation and have to worry about that. The point, of course, is where are we today?
Mm-hmm.
And I think today we, as is the rest of the world, have had a bit of a double whammy. our growth had slowed down before COVID hit. And
Yes.
post-COVID, it has really been badly impacted. But there are many silver linings, and I'll talk about them in the course of the evening. And I'm despondent about the immediate future.
Mm-hmm.
I feel there's a lot of people out there who have suffered on account of the COVID and the impact of COVID in terms of availability of credit, in terms of the business scenario itself, altered models, and of course the fact that there are many people out of a job. So
Absolutely.
it's quite a tough scene out there. But having said that, I would imagine that at some point in the not too distant future, we should see a turnaround, and we'll talk about some of those opportunities
Mm-hmm.
slightly
Mm-hmm.
later in the conversation.
Sure, sure, absolutely. Let's delve a little deeper into when you say impact of COVID, and let's take practical scenarios. Now, as we know, in this new Unlock 4.0, more and more corporates across the country, not just corporates, you talk about firms in the MSME sector, startup entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, they are risking going out and going back into the market in literally a very urgent need to get that traction going, to get that blood injected back into the system and get things moving on, right? Now, one of the inevitable sort of concomitants of this is at some point of time or the other, notwithstanding all the safety precautions and social distancing maintained, right? This is directly proportional. If there is a greater amount of activity across the board for all of us, right, who are out there trying to make ends meet and beyond, uh, then sooner or later the chance or the risk of the infection becomes larger. To take an actual case in point, I know that around the beginning of the week, there was a case at the IndusInd HO where there were COVID positive cases, right? And then the HR team kind of like swung into action, saying, okay, this is what needs to be done from a sanitization standpoint, this is what needs to be done from a fumigation standpoint, etc. So I want you to talk through what happens when the crisis hits you, because I think we have gone well over the point where we live in denial. Everybody who's out there, who's got a business open, who's got an office open today, has to know heart of hearts 24/7. Tomorrow it can happen to me. So at that point of time, what should be the SOPs in place? What should be the crisis management? And how should that be executed?
See, the answer to that is manifold. One is the impact on business.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The other is, I think that's what you're asking is, coping strategy within the context of office.
Yes.
How do you kind of return to some sense of normalcy so that business can restart? Now, for the banks, especially client-facing roles, it has been part of essential services right from the beginning.
Yes.
We have coped and dealt with having a presence in our branches right from day one. So I don't think it was a case of we all went home and then how do we get back?
Mm-hmm.
What we are dealing with is, when we go into work, and it did happen once or twice, when we go into work, everything is kind of on a roster basis. It's never 100% capacity. And there is a very clear procedure in place in terms of informing, in terms of mask wearing, in terms of sanitizing, in terms of temperature checks, in terms of getting periodic, the whole community is checked for antibodies and things like that. Mm-hmm. So it's now become pretty much the normal. What does happen is, of course, people are coming from the real world to work, right? And they are meeting people in either the home context or in the traveling home context or in the neighborhood, etc. And it's literally impossible to keep yourself isolated and in a bubble if you want to kind of rejoin the real world in some senses.
Right.
So occasionally we do get people who come in and they have temperature, and then we send them off to do their tests. And if they have something positive, they either go home and get quarantined, or if they are more difficult cases, we have arrangements with hospitals to arrange for treatment. So I feel that at the end of the day, this calls for a substantial amount of change in terms of the way we deal with collective decision making and feeling responsible for one another. You can't be stupid and you can't be rash. This is not the time and place for that. That you have to show a certain amount of maturity and listen and behave according to certain norms. And I feel that most offices will cope with some kind of normalcy over the coming 2 or 3 months, because I'm in Mumbai. I can see that already happening. Of course, the scary thing about Mumbai is literally the day when we start the train service again, because that means thousands of people, in a kind of
very confined space, lakhs of people, literally.
yes, cloistered environment. So,
yes.
yeah. So I think that is really one of the concerns. Otherwise, in terms of bed capacity, in terms of procedures at office and workplaces, etc., I think we've done pretty good, at least in Mumbai, as I see it. We should, if we are reasonable and careful and follow instructions as a society, if we have madcaps, just running around, not listening and not being socially responsible, yes, we'll have trouble. I mean, I see today in the news that there's some dhaba in Delhi where out of 360 staff, some 60 or 70 were tested positive, and about in last week, almost 10,000 people at, I think, Delhi opened up, and everyone just jumped into a car and decided to, go off for a trip.
Go back into life, chalo, let me enjoy life full on Delhi style, right?
I don't blame them, this sense of being trapped for 4-5 months can be
it's traumatic. It's absolutely traumatic. Yes. Yes.
So I think people are also desperate, so the moment they get the opportunity, and that is where the maturity comes in, of us being responsible and also taking some accountability for our own collective good.
Right. Absolutely. So talk to us in terms of from the employee's perspective, right? Obviously, everyone across sector, the number one imperative would be, can I somehow still keep my job? Because we are still under a paradigm where there's continuing retrenchment across various sectors, right? So that's a no-brainer. That's definitely number one. But over and above that, what, in your experience, because you're talking to people on the ground, what would be some of the additional ways where leaders can come in and make an impact, make a difference on the ground, vis-a-vis the equation with the employees, vis-a-vis making their work not just safer, but maybe even more engaging, more interesting, and sort of, buoy the motivation factor on the ground?
Yeah. So I'll tell you some of, from, our experience. First and foremost, I think, is the fear of the job.
Yes.
I think leadership across the board must have some empathy, because this is a time people are worried about their security, and more so because they feel that if you lose your job now, it's almost like 10 times more difficult to get another job given the condition in the market currently. So that's one thing. Having said that, there are many companies I have spoken to who have started this thing of saying that we will be fair, we will be very supportive, and if necessary we will cut back on remuneration, but we'll not let people go. But what is happening, I guess, is with the the COVID staying in a prolonged manner, the ability to sustain that is progressively declining, because if you don't have business and you're still paying salaries and things like that, so there are some people who are just out of sheer desperation and having no other alternative, saying either we are closing down or we are letting go of people. So certainly I think that is a big challenge, and it needs to be handled with a little bit of sensitivity. And I would imagine that most of the mature organizations will help with the process if they are forced into a situation where they will have to let people go, or give people the security that maybe this is a temporary thing for 3 months for us to tide over, and then when we return back to normalcy, you will be back with a job. So whatever that communication exercise, that is absolutely essential. I think the other part, of course, is that roles have changed very dramatically. From being present in an office environment to sitting alone at home, it's a world difference. And oftentimes, what I'm seeing is that there are many, social and gender issues also that they are starting to get thrown up. So when I go home and work from home, from a purely patriarchal gender kind of perspective, I get to sit and do my work because everyone in the house says, Saab must not be disturbed. He's got. But I have seen many colleagues, women, who at home are yanked into all the chores at home, with the kids in front of computers, for online classes, doing the cooking, this, that, and the other. And when they have to join a call, poor things are really struggling to make that happen, and not feel guilted into all kinds of issues. And the second thing is, I have found that often people at home did not have the wherewithal. I mean, I know a lot of our senior staff, for example, in some of the older staff, were not that familiar with technology, at home and connecting, and often also were not that, they were not facilitated by the last mile. Their Wi-Fi was not there. If it was there, it was a very slim bandwidth, and they would struggle to join in and all of that. And that brought upon its own sense of insecurity, because they felt that if they didn't participate wholeheartedly in all the office calls, they will be, picked up for, putting in the basket that is, susceptible to being, let go, etc., etc. So I think there are many of these issues that are progressively being addressed. The other thing, of course, is, recently I went to my to get a pair of glasses made, and my regular man at the shop wasn't there, and he was, living so far away that in the absence of the train, he to come by a taxi. That was a huge outgo every day. When I asked the person at the shop who was there, the owner, he said, Paul, we were very quiet. We didn't have much business. Now there's a lot of pent-up demand. People are calling. They want checkups. They want new glasses made, etc., etc.
Right.
And we need our staff. And what do I do? So we had a nice conversation about the possibilities of doing an office car, this, that, and the other. Problems of how do you transport people and make good upon any outgo that they have to deal with. So there are many issues that will come up, but I think the biggest, to my mind, is the concern on how long this thing will extend and what will it do to my job security.
Exactly. Talking about which, right? We have the question on the screen. There's one thing where an employee loses the job, and you talked about that. But there's also a prospect if, particularly, there is no clear, transparent communication, that a large section of the workforce comes to office, works, goes back, and lives 24 by 7 in this constant dread that I don't know tomorrow I may be out of a job, right? And that has a tremendously adverse impact on their motivation, on their focus, on their productivity. They would tend to burn out more or stress out much faster, etc. So, given that very, very clear possibility, what should leaders, corporate leaders, for example, be doing to allay those fears? It's one thing to say, look, we've had to let go of people because of such and such exigency, but there are large numbers of people still remaining and working in the office, right? Or in the sector. How do you allay their fears?
So I'll tell you, for example, uh, there are certain say elements that start to slow down, but there are certain other elements that really start to pick up. And one of the classic cases in, say, banking and in the financial services is the digital payment space.
Mm-hmm.
Transformation in terms of usage and the adoption rates is just mind boggling. I mean, today, almost everybody is, forced into adoption and is happy to, learn how to make payment, whether it's Google Pay, Paytm, bank, interbank transfers, NEFTs, what.
Mm-hmm.
So the support systems do not exist that well in the banking and other channels. So one thing, of course, is shifting people into job categories that are showing tremendous growth. Uh, the other thing, of course, is that people themselves have to be open to a little bit of adaptability.
Mm-hmm.
And these are fantastic opportunities to actually build alternate skills and capabilities. But I feel that there are, this whole sense of will I lose my job? Will I lose my job? I think the only way to deal with that is to say that I will have my job, and I'm going to be open to a reassignment if it comes, because it gives me an opportunity to learn something new. And of course, the worst comes to worst, I'm hoping that that is at least in the organized sector, that's a relatively smaller percentage for now. That if I do lose my job, that I have, the ability to draw on the support systems that organizations will provide. So I'm hoping that organizations will provide and not be insensitive and just put people to pasture. But yes, I think there are many alternate areas that are emerging, and some of them are incredibly exciting. And even if it means temporarily to take a hit of some kind in terms of comp and remuneration, it is something that is worth exploring and experimenting with.
And will obviously, stand you in good stead over a longer term, right? Once the
And
economy.
it's going to become the new normal, because
Mhm.
I think what's going to happen is that life cycles for many things are going to get shorter, and you cannot walk in with a skill and 40 years later retire with that same skill. Those days are
Exactly.
gone.
Yep.
And we were thinking that every 10 years we needed to make a shift. I think now the situation is that you got to be ready for a shift at all times. But I am a firm believer that when one thing goes down, another thing,
Mm-hmm.
has its head as an opportunity.
So speaking of which, right, you talked about some of the silver linings, and you indicated what those silver linings or opportunities are within the sector. If we move beyond banking and financial services, what are some of the low-hanging fruit that you see out there that, yes, I can see distinct opportunities opening up across these particular domains or other sectors?
Yeah. So, I sit on a committee of the World Bank on food security. It sounds rather, boring and very bureaucratic. But some really exciting stuff is happening there. And what is happening is that there are many farm to consumer products which are now being put out there, fascinating apps, and which have embedded the full supply chain. Everything from warehousing to finance to logistics management to order taking and consolidation and aggregation. It's amazing the kind of stuff that's happening. Now you can turn around and say that, oh God, I am a banker. But the thing is that as a banker, you bring to bear skills, not just in banking, you bring payments, you bring finance, you bring, there are skills on crop finance, there's all kinds of skills. And people are looking for some of these skills to build up these things. So logistics management, health, I sit on the foundation, we have multiple hospitals. I tell you, the dramatic change that's happened, for example, in telemedicine. We have, for example, a service called Sanjeevani, where out of Hyderabad, we run a call center, and it's an animal husbandry service. So in Jharkhand, for example, we have got an army of vets, and if your livestock gets a problem, you call this call center, and the call center actually has a GPS tracking of the closest vet and gets a ticket. So in 1 hour, the vet has to call that farmer and say, yes, I understand you have a problem with your cow. And within 6 hours has to go and physically attend to the problem. Now, what is happening is that at the back end, we are finding that with 2 or 3 good quality doctors, the learning is such that about 30 to 40% of the problems are now progressively being dealt with from the call center itself because of the learning associated. So we are embedding AI into the treatment solution, right? So we see patterns and then it gives you the answer. So the explosion in things like telemedicine, is amazing. The explosion in terms of, if you see the payments world itself, digital payments, it's amazing. So pharma, health, insurance, supply chain, logistics, all these are, I think, sitting on the cusp of some fabulous explosive growth.
Right. Talk to us about, I mean, everybody knows about the Hinduja Foundation in terms of its ethos, right? To transform the lives of the underprivileged in a very fundamental and sustaining way over time. But in these pandemic times, what are some of the key projects and initiatives that are being undertaken that you're currently overseeing? And in the context of that, the question on the screen is that we have a large corporate body like the Hinduja Group, right? How are they channelizing their resources to have socially aware, socially oriented initiatives to make things buoyant again across the economy?
Yeah, so Hinduja Foundation sits as a philanthropic arm of the family, but it also sits as a coordinating agency for the many businesses that the group has in India. So IndusInd Bank, Ashok Leyland, Gulf Oil, Next Digital, Hinduja Global Services, Leyland Finance, and all of these. There are many, many different companies, right? And they're all operating on the ground in different contexts and different geographies, etc. What we did a few years back, I mean, the Hinduja Foundation itself was, 1968 founded, but what we decided 3 years ago is that we need to pick up some flagship causes that run and string across group companies. And one of the first things we did was, in those days, highlight water stewardship as one of our key areas. And so everything from multi-village watershed development to water ATMs to rooftop harvesting to restoration of lakes and ponds. These are the 4 streams that we chose. So at any point of time, we've got a bunch of them. And if you go to our website and social media, Instagram and all, you get to see all those stories detailed and, brought to you from the field. The other 2 things that we found across the group companies and in the foundation, which was a bit disparate, but large amounts were being spent collectively, was in education and health. So education was, we primarily chose two places to operate in. One was improving outcomes in foundational literacy. So, learning, we found that kids in class 5, when you told them single digit addition, they would start like this. The quality of education had to be improved. So educational outcomes at primary. And the other thing was getting job readiness. The problem with, India has been traditionally, we run after our conventional degrees and all, but we are useless thereafter in terms of job readiness and employability. So skill and employability is the other area we play in. And the third one is, we used to have nutritional support programs. But one of the things that we discovered was that it was not just about getting increased attendance in our schools, but it was also about much better cognitive skill building. Because if your nutrition intake is good, your ability to understand, retain, comprehend is much better. So that's become a part of our education program. So wherever we do interventions, and we do interventions in about 4,000 schools, government schools across the country, and about more than 2 lakh students. Nutrition is also the third leg of our educational pillar. In health, we have the hospitals, which are some of the best facilities in the country. But we also discovered that there were many problems that we have on our health landscape, but because of the sheer number, the exceptional category was always getting short shrift. So, for example, in diabetes, while diabetes was rampant and government has a certain acknowledgement of the scale of the problem, type 1 diabetes, which impacts primarily children, the support systems are somewhat missing or weak. So we decided to do, and play there and create a national registry by linking up multiple hospitals outside of the group also, and to try and create not only insight into the problem, but also assist with illness, support for medication, pumps, diabetes monitoring equipment, etc. Similar thing with tuberculosis. Tuberculosis, there are national campaigns which the government runs and has been doing so for many years. But multi-drug resistant tuberculosis is a special area because of the drop-off in, the discipline of medication. And people get relapse, and then they have a problem with whatever drugs are given, it just doesn't work. So that's a sub-segment that is becoming bigger and, side. The third thing we are looking at now is to get into mental health. And that's one of our outcomes from the COVID and the learning. Where we feel that, nationally, mental health and the general sense of well-being has been quite badly damaged and impacted.
Disrupted, yes.
We really need to do work there. But in terms of responding purely to COVID, many things happened. Everything from, helping our Ashok Leyland put a team of engineers to develop a low-cost ventilator. We also retrofitted a lot of our vehicles to do fumigation. We retrofitted our small vans to become ambulances. We did a lot of work with respect to water, getting water and dry ration distribution and food distribution and things like that. So a variety of things. We have had call centers supporting, state governments for COVID. We've done, healthcare worker education to quickly ramp up on the skills required, because so many facilities are being set up which are temporary facilities and we don't have the people, right? So some basic education to, manage, for example, a isolation facility where you need to learn how to operate the oxygen, delivery systems. You don't have to be a huge master at things, but you really need to be kind of prepared for stuff. So that's the Hinduja Foundation. And two other things that we have integrated rural development. So we work, for example, a lot with in rural areas, especially with tribals, across the spectrum. So all our learnings in education, health, water, etc., we put together into holistic development projects in these tribal areas. So to give you an example, in Palghar, in Jawahar Taluk, we are in about 28 villages and about 70 hamlets. And one of the things we discovered, women were walking sometimes as much as 6 to 7 kilometers downhill to go to the valley to get water. And they would take 2 ghadas and a baby on the hip. And when they were coming back with this kind of weight, climbing up the hill, in the early 30s, some of them were experiencing uterine displacement because of the, the sheer weight that they were carrying.
Yes.
And so, a lot of these issues get addressed if you look at this thing holistically. And last but not the least, we have a large collection of historic art objects, which is a numismatic collection of about 35,000 coins, which is arguably the world's best collection of ancient Indian coins. And, we've been running a lot of programs in colleges trying to showcase these, bring education projects to kids, etc. So that's the kind of span. Our group companies do other things also. Like, for example, IndusInd Bank does a lot of work in sports for the different and the girls' side.
Paul, I mean, thinking of arts and culture, right? It's not top of the mind, but it's interesting, and I think it's notable to mention that there's considerable amount of work that the Hinduja Foundation does, let's say with the Victoria and Albert Museum or the British Museum for that matter, right, in London. But purely on a personal basis, right? You've also started, which must have started at some point of time as a passion project and now has grown. So talk to us about the Sarmaya Arts Foundation. How did this come about?
Yeah, Sarmaya is a personal passion project. It started not so much as Sarmaya as just a collector would. My father, I'm basically from Kerala and grew up in Delhi. When I grew up in Delhi, my father one day called me and gave me a Vaseline bottle full of Travancore coins. And of course, he had carried them as a memento of his home back in Kerala. He gave that to me, and then I started. And, I used to go to all these coin exhibitions. I mean, those days I was a young teenager, and as a young adult, I didn't have the kind of money that you need to, but I was very excited about the history around these things. So I slowly started visiting, and then putting aside a little bit of money, started to buy and build a collection. And one thing led to the other. Coins, I needed to, decipher coins. And in Delhi, if you wanted to collect coins, most of what you could collect were either Mughal or Islamic sultanates.
Right.
All of that was in Farsi Urdu. So if you needed to learn and how to decipher, you needed to literally learn
the language.
Yeah. So I learned Urdu for many years, and I used to go around, and whenever I went to coins, the guys would also pull out other allied things. Someone would give me a map, someone would give me an engraving, and it slowly started like that. And my wife Tina, who passed away to cancer in 2014, she was a great aficionado of tribal art, and she used to do a lot of work with tribal communities. And we used to travel to the interior parts of the country, and between us, we collected a fair amount of tribal art. So all in all, when she passed away, I decided to set up the museum in her memory. And she was she was a lawyer, but she gave up her practice, and she was into, working with children, and creating protection mechanisms for children as a lawyer. And of course, she wanted all of this to be put at the disposal of youngsters. So that's why we, started Sarmaya, which both Urdu and Devanagari claim ownership of the word, but it means property, but in our context, collective property. So
right.
All of this is put into this entity, and the entity is now very much into outreach, working very extensively with kids. In fact, this whole initiative, fortuitously for us, we started as a digital. Even though we have a physical archive, our outreach was entirely digital. And in this COVID times, it has served us very well. For example, we now build content for partners like Pratham. They, put it out into their community across the states and in rural areas. And it's a fascinating thing, because I think the general acceptance that from language and numeracy skills, if you really want to learn life skills, one of the things we as a nation should, do more of is to ground ourselves in our own culture. We don't do enough of that. I think, so we lack that. So the moment you get a bit of that exposure, I feel you become much more secure individuals, and you just love the diversity of this country and what it has to offer. So that's Sarmaya, and now my partner Pavitra, she's my wife now. We started off in 2017 as partners, and then recently we got married, and we run this thing.
Great. So one of the very interesting things around Sarmaya, right, and this is particularly keeping in mind that the audience at Prohor and a very large majority of people who are watching this program today, Paul, owe their provenance or trace their provenance back to Bengal. And so tell us about the curated theme-based events at Sarmaya, which are focused on Bengal and Kolkata. How is that going? How should people participate in that? Do we have links for the events that have already taken place? That's going to be very, very interesting for our viewers.
Yes. So, what we do every 2 months, we take one theme and then try and get as deep under the skin of that theme as possible. Yes. So, we've done, performing arts. The last one was shadow leather puppetry out of Andhra Pradesh, a performing art called Tolu Bomalata. So it's leather puppets, and it's the storytelling using leather puppets. So we talk about that very intensively, who are the people, what are the backstories, what is, where are they from, because they were migrants from Maharashtra who went into most of the southern states. There are different techniques. There's multiple versions of the Ramayana that is used by each of those communities. So the context can change, all of that. So by the end of that, you kind of get a sense of something which is, so much more elaborate. The current one we are doing is Kolkata and the Bengal presidency. And of course, I mean, we have been putting out stories starting early August, and the stories out of Bengal won't stop in 2 months. So we have to, we'll do the best we can. So we have everything from music of Bengal. We have paintings from Bengal. We have fashion from Bengal. We have history from Bengal. Tomorrow I'm doing a talk on Plassey.
That's with Sudeep Chakravarti?
Yes, with Sudeep. And last Saturday I did one with Rudrangshu Mukherjee, who's Chancellor of Ashoka, on the early nationalists of Bengal. And the week after that, we are doing one with Aparna Sen on the movie Legacy. So,
Right.
I mean, you can go on and on and on talking. But the thing is that for somebody outside of Bengal to be exposed to this richness
Mhm.
is an amazing thing. So, we are doing a walk on Sunday, and that's in Dalhousie. And we have got participants from Norway, United States, London, Singapore, India, everywhere. And the desire to learn more because of the sheer richness. So if you go to our social in Instagram handle, or if you go to our website,
Mhm.
you will see many stories. You'll see about literature, you will see about performing arts, you'll see about history, you'll see about music, everything related to Bengal and Calcutta. Food.
Yes, you can't have Bengal without food, right?
Yeah,
We have
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yes,
traditional obsession
absolutely.
with food. So essentially, just to summarize that, it's either the Sarmaya Arts Foundation website where you have the links, or the Insta handle where you have the
Yes,
story, and you also have these talks, right, that we're talking about.
yes. So it's Sarmaya underscore India.
Mhm.
That's the Insta handle. And it's sarmaya.in, which is the website. It's dot
Okay,
.in.
great. I'm sure that after this event, uh, if you give it a few days of a break and then you do your Google Analytics, you'll suddenly see a spurt in the number of traction, right? The clicks and views that you
No,
find.
we love people to come by and also to tell us what more we can do. I mean, we've done so many different things in terms of our digital outreach. If you look at some of the talks, the snippets, the
Indeed.
walks, the outreach, the music, everything is digitally brought to you. But there are people with such standing and capability that it's a special treat for people, I think, even within Bengal, to actually like a refresher.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's something that definitely all our viewers will be looking forward to, I'm sure. We now come to another more recent facet of your interest, right? I'm sure this has been there all through, because each of these, we're talking about Samaya's Foundation, all of these are ventures in themselves. But let's talk a little bit about the startup ecosystem, the way that you perceive it today, and which in your which are the ones in your opinion, in terms of certain domains or certain segments, are the big growth opportunities. So as a mentor, as an investor, what kind of startups would you like to work with?
So let me put it this way. First and foremost, I think those are already in existence. What I have seen is some of them, by the nature of their model and the space that they are playing in, have been advantaged substantially. And to give you an example, in the space of online education,
Mhm.
so these guys are really doing well. There are others who have good models, but who were caught with their pants down because they were not anticipating this, and probably for this cycle, they didn't raise money before COVID to last out these 6 months of a downturn.
Mhm.
And so, liquidity and the absence of
Becomes a huge crunch.
did them in. So some of them actually, I know, are being bought at substantially lower valuations, even though the model fundamentally is good. So
Mhm.
I of people who are doing uh, fabric, apparel, who are really doing well, who suddenly, simply because they didn't have the funding at the right time. And the problem now is, if you go to someone and say, just help me tide over, that's a difficult conversation. Uh, the other thing is, of course, that, a lot of people who have had the money and who are now kind of tiding over this period, they have
Mhm.
also made realignments in the product mix. So there's another, entity that I know of who actually did what they were doing was they had uh, uh, they had gone around the country and looked at savories which are very region specific and which brought back memories. So, like for example, Muruk from Tamil Nadu, or what do you get at Victoria Maidan, your Jalmuri.
Yes. Jalmuri, Pani Puri,
Yeah.
Puchka.
So
Absolutely.
those kind of things. So they started off and they had 400 different things, which have now, brought down to something like 20. They had been in operation for a couple of years already, and they had data which they smartly used to create the stars in the collection. And they've now limited their offering to this, but suddenly sales have shot up because those were on the 80-20 basis, the successful one. And the burden of the dead ducks is not bothering them anymore. They were very swift with that decision. They cut it out. So I think, like I told you, I see finance and banking is disrupting a lot of the conventional entities. Farm to table agri related stuff. I see health. All these guys like Farm Easy and all that are doing well. I see education, online education, doing very well. So there's, entities that facilitate distance connection. For example, the platform that we are talking on, StreamYard or Zoom or whatever, these are things that are, they were there, but adoption was, constrained by a variety of.
Yeah, it was kind of on a need to, it was like a nice to have. Now it's become mandatory, it's become essential.
Absolutely. So that's happened. Entertainment, a variety of entertainment channels have, started to blossom. So I think there's a bunch, of things. And I see a question here from a gentleman called Shaunak. What is your advice for young startups to help combat the adversities of the pandemic? And I think some of it is what I'm saying. You have to make, first and foremost, a fundamental assessment of your model. Is this model now relevant to the emerging new world? Two, are you having a product suite that has some laggards and you have excess flab? In which case, please ruthlessly cut. Number three, make sure you preserve money. So if you were doing, deep discount based eyeball gathering, stop that, because I don't think that's sustainable. And number four, I think, is essentially to try and have some conversations. If you are not funded well, we don't know how long this is going to go on. If the model is right, the worst thing to happen is to be caught out without liquidity. So try and have some conversations. If those don't happen, get into a partnership with somebody else who may be in a similar thing, and economies of scale start to kick in and you benefit from some of those things. So I think these are some of the things I would like to leave you with.
Yeah. And you mentioned entertainment. So there's one around entertainment, one of the questions, particularly around entertainment. Of course, this where we are talking at the moment is a case in point where, let's say, Prohor, 13 months back, it started off as an IndusInd, as a Bengali web channel or web portal for news. And now it has all of these. This is just one example of the kind of session that we're doing. So it's informative, it's entertainment for some people, etc. And there are specific programs around entertainment, etc. Is there anything additional to this where we can use, let's say, maybe technology as a kind of a platform or leverage to help people who are otherwise maybe struggling from a traditional entertainment standpoint? I'm thinking more of the large number of the event managers and the publicity managers and people who would have done like face-to-face in-person events for corporates, or also on a B2C kind of a platform.
Well, I think, one of the very personal experiences I can tell you that I really enjoyed this period of COVID to, put whatever learning I could, get to use technology to do the things I wanted to do. So I have used technology to create content. in the past, content was preserve of very few. Today, people are all about creating their own content, putting it out there. People are about, how do I spend my day? Part of it is facilitated by, work time, but there's a fairly large part which is facilitated, which requires facilitation in terms of keeping me occupied. Now, occupied doesn't mean entertainment is the only option for movies and things like that. I'm
Mm-hmm.
also doing a lot of interesting educational modules, So, like, for example, what we did with Pratham. Today is the time to learn so much more about so many things and also invest in yourself. So this term entertainment, I think, moves from pure education on the one hand to
Mm-hmm.
gamification of education to content creation to different channels in terms of finding what people associate with, because now everyone has become a consumer. My mom, who's 91, also is deeply into TV viewing now. And, in the past, she spent less time with all of that in front of the screen, but now she does more. And so do I, so do the children, so do even my driver, who literally doesn't have to drive anywhere, but he's living at home with me.
Right.
He's his phone on, and watching all kinds of stuff. And it's not just Hotstar and movies.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of interesting stuff. He's listening to, analysis of COVID. He's listening to the politics and commentary. He's doing a lot of things which is different. So I think the entertainment industry per se, if you look at it, entertainment and hospitality and travel, which were the worst affected. My son is a chef in New York. Uh, he, for 4 months, he was absolutely at a loss, but
Mm-hmm.
he took the time to learn new ingredients, new cooking, new this, new
New
that.
recipes. Right.
Now, as the
So now he
restaurant.
has new offerings out there in the
Yes,
market. Right.
absolutely, absolutely. So as they are opening up, they are all getting back, and even travel now. If you look at the airline industry, the prognosis was, oh God, finished, but that's not true anymore. Um, the hotel industry is also learning and coping. Today, if you go into a hotel, I would say the way the better ones have managed their affairs, they are
Mm-hmm.
probably safer than oftentimes your own home, where a lot of rash things happen. People walk in, walk out
Yep.
without thinking. The hotels are driven by process, and so
By
they're
the
kept,
SOPs. Yep.
and they picked up the baton and they are running well. So I think give them another 3-4 months and they'll
Mm-hmm.
slowly start coming back to normalcy. And I would say now the entertainment industry has the ability, because of bandwidth and all, to personalize much more. So what I used to see as stock entertainment, I can now look and surf the net and find things which are so personally appealing to me specifically as a person,
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
the job of creating content which is now more and more specific, I think, will drive entertainment.
So it's become far more customized, far more individualized, right? This is what I want,
Absolutely.
as opposed to this is
Yeah.
what bankers want, or this is what art aficionados want, or this is what history buffs or film buffs want, right? It's like
Yeah.
me as an
Yeah.
right, exactly.
And also now you see what has happened is that in the past at home, everyone sat in front of the TV. It was a collective decision. Today, I have my laptop because I have to work from home. I have a
It was pretty much a ritual in a way,
yeah,
back in the
yeah,
80s and early 80s when there was only TV and there was only Doordarshan. It was
yeah,
like a ritual, the family ritual.
yeah. Great.
Exactly. So we've gone over an hour, but I, for one, certainly didn't feel the time pass. It's great to have your insights, and I think the best thing out of this, personally for me as a learning, is that you could be a corporate leader, you could be a manager in a large firm, you could be a solopreneur, you could be a startup co-founder, you could be a chef. Take this time not to get dejected, not to brood, not to be depressed, but to start thinking of bouncing back with new offerings, new insights, new products, and calibrate the old way of thinking and the old method of working, right? Literally with a new mindset, if I will. And what I would really commend is amidst all of this, doom and gloom kind of a narrative that we have rampant across media, you've always scored the high notes, and we saw that earlier when we did the interview for Economic Times, and we saw that again today, Paul, tonight. The note of optimism is the final abiding note that one finds in you. So thank you very much for that, and I'm sure the viewers have had a treat. And we'll be back again soon with another episode of Candid Talk. Till then, thank you. Good night. Thanks a
Pleasure is
lot.
mine. Thank you so much for having me, Avik.
Thanks, Paul. We'll be in touch. Thank you. Bye bye.